right, welcome to the first video for week 3. So the week 3 part of the class is all about applying linear programming to financial planning problems. That's why I had you just read a few sections from chapter 4 and a few sections from chapter 5. So what I'm going to do is, for example, in this video, I'm going to work through a marketing problem. Now this is a problem that's very similar to the one that's in your book, but I've made some changes so that I can apply it directly to financial planning. And then we'll go through some changes that we could make to this problem, to address some different issues, so on and so forth. So that's what we're going to be doing this week with the videos. So here I have this problem, and instead of reading you a story, I've just put the information out. So you have a financial planner, and he can put on a workshop for prospective clients. He can sponsor an event, say a charity event, or some other local event, or he can do direct mail. And the purpose is, these are his marketing channels, and he or she just wants to increase their number of prospects. So to put on a workshop, that's $2,500, $20,000 for the event, so on and so forth. Now, if he does a workshop, he invites 15 people to the workshop, so the number of prospects for that is 15. If he sponsors an event, he can expect to get about 250 prospects, direct mail, 1,500. Now, if he does do the workshop, he or she does the workshop. Let's say that these are 2-hour workshops. So one of the advisors would have to spend 2 hours at the workshop. A staff member would have to spend time. If they do an event, well, that's, these are longer, say 4 hours to do the event. And then direct mailing, well, the advisor doesn't do any of that. That would be on the staff. So what we have here are our constraints. So this particular financial advisor has a $100,000 constraint for cost. So in other words, his marketing budget is $100,000. The advisor is willing to assign 20 hours of his or her time to marketing. And then, of course, he or she is willing to have their staff people spend up to 80 hours in doing marketing related activities. Okay, so what we want to do here is obviously maximize the number of new prospects. So we'll get this set up. So I also should say something, right? The way this is set up is, this is one workshop, right? So my variables here, I'll let it be, W for workshop, SE, sponsor an event, and then direct mail. So these are on per unit terms. One workshop, one event, and literally like one mail, right? One piece of mail. That's why the direct mail can hit 15,000 prospects. So one way to think about the direct mail is that's one letter, right, that you're sending out to these prospective clients. All right. So the parameters of our objective function, since we want to maximize the number of new prospects, the parameters are going to be the prospects themselves, right? How many prospects can we expect to get for each advertising? And then, of course, our choice variables. I'm going to put in my filler of just 1, 1, 1. And then, of course, we have our objective function. And as always, that's our sum product. So sum product of the parameters, sum product of the choice variables. Voila. There you go. Okay, now we have our constraints. So I've got 3 constraints. Okay, so the first constraint is going to be our cost constraints. So I'm going to take these parameters for our cost, copy them down. All right, and then this would be my sum product. Now here, this has got to be less than or equal to, right? Now you could do this either way, right? You can say that you want to spend up to say $1,000, or I'm sorry, 100,000. So oops, in that case, you just put an equal, right? So I'll use the equal sign for this, but this could be less than or equal, right? Because you don't have to spend the entire 100,000. So I'll do less than or equal to, and then of course the constraint here is 100,000. Okay, the second time the advisor and a staff his or her staff have to spend at each event. And of course, these have to be less than or equal to's. And 20 hours and 80 hours. Okay. And then finally, what are my constraints based on my choice variables? So highlight that, and of course that. And then anchor the choice variables. Okay, copy this down. There we go. All right, so now I'm ready to run my solver. So data, solver. Okay, so I want to, my objective function is H4. I want to maximize that by changing those 3 cells. You can see I've already done this. I want to make sure it works, so that's what these are. So pretend like this is all clean or empty. So my constraints, well, this number here has to equal that number. And then, finally, these 2 constraints have to be less than or equal to these 2 constraints. Simplex LP, got my non-negativity, solve. Perfect. All right, so what this is telling me is I am going to spend, or I'm actually going to do, say, about 5 sponsored events. And I know this sounds weird, but I'm actually only going to send out about 3 mailers, right? So I get, I'm sorry, that's not true. 3 mailers, right? Yeah, 3 mailers, with 3 mailers, and each mailer is going to get me 1,500 prospects. Okay, so I expect, I maximize my profits. I expect to come across 5,757 new prospects. I'm going to spend my entire budget. I'm basically, going to maximize, or not maximize, but basically hit all of my constraints. I'm a little bit under here for the advisor's time, but let's face it, that's close enough. Okay, so anyway, here is a basic marketing problem. Now, I want to talk about some changes. So first of all, you could imagine one change would just be adding more columns, right? I did try to keep this a little bit simple, but obviously, for your businesses, these are not the only ways to advertise or to market your financial planning services. So, you might have internet, social media, radio, maybe you're big enough to do television, whatever, right? So the first thing is we can add in more marketing channels. Now, the other thing that we can do is actually, instead of maximizing the total number of new prospects, is we can minimize cost. And so I wanted to show you that because, see, what's so interesting about some of this stuff is these are all fundamentally different problems. So in the way that I have constructed this problem, I have basically assumed that this particular advisor already has $100,000 to spend around and say, look, let me minimize my cost, right? Subject to getting so many new prospects, right? And so this would be a problem where the advisor is trying to figure out, how much he or she should spend on marketing. So if we flip this thing around, our parameters are going to have to change. So here, now if I'm going to minimize cost, now I put cost as the parameters of my objective function, right? These don't change, and my objective function is still not going to change. But now I need to change this, right? So here, constraint 1 was my cost constraint. Now constraint 1 are going to be the prospects, right, per marketing channel. Now I've got a few other things to do here. These 2 constraints are still less than or equal to, right? Because I'm maximized at, I put a maximum on the number of hours I'm willing to work and that my staff is willing to work. What has to change is this. So constraint 1 now are my new prospects. And the idea here goes like this, right? How much do I have to spend in order to get, say, 3,000 prospects? Okay? So to do this, so before I do it, I want you to understand the difference here, right? And this is what is so great about linear programming, is it can handle all these various problems that the firm may have, right? So in the first case, we assumed that the firm had the $100,000. Now what the firm is really saying is, what should my marketing budget be? How much should I spend in order to get X number of new prospects, okay? So again, we're going to solve this, but I need to make some changes to my solver. Okay, so the objective function stays the same, but now I'm going to minimize instead of maximize. The choice variables stay the same, but this constraint here, right, the equal to constraint that I had for my budget, that now has to change. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to add my new one. So the number of new prospects that I get has to be greater than or equal to, say, 3,000. And hit OK. Everything else stays the same. Solve. Found a solution. And so look, obviously I changed everything. But so what this is telling me is, hey, what you should do is just get 2 direct mailing campaigns, right, that each cost $1,000. So I'm going to spend $2,000, right, to get my 3,000 customers. And of course, I don't have to spend any of my time, and my staff only has to spend about 40 hours. All right. So that's one way to change up the basic marketing problem. A few other changes that I've got listed here. So when it comes to marketing, right, the way I set this up is I was just looking for new prospects. But probably a more beneficial problem would be new clients, right? Right, because prospects, you don't know if they're going to become clients, right? So if I do new clients, please note that you're going to need the conversion rate. So in other words, if you go to a workshop and you invite 15 people, well, what percent of those people are going to become clients, right? Same thing, if direct mail. If I do a direct mailing piece and I come in contact with 1,500 prospects, well, what percentage of those prospects are going to convert to new clients? So you can easily change this to new clients. You just need some more data. You can actually do this for revenue. You can ask yourselves, look, how much revenue does my marketing budget generate, right? So all you would need to do that is really just a revenue line. How much revenue per client do you generate from workshops? How much revenue per client do you generate from sponsored events, right? Now, I know that these might all be the same, but maybe for whatever reason, the workshops primarily produce one different type of client. The events produce a different, maybe the workshops you just have financial planning, people that just want financial planning services. But the sponsorship events, maybe they want you to do wealth management or something like that. And then maybe for direct mailing, maybe it's just consulting or something like that, right? I mean, I don't know, but the point is you could easily do revenue if you knew what the revenue per event was. And again, it may all be the same, right? If your mix of clients from these various events is the same, then the revenue per client per event might be the same. At any rate, so you could do revenue if you had that information. You could mandate a marketing mix. So for example, like I have here in parentheses, maybe like the sponsored event, maybe it's a charity event and you are really serious about this charity. And so, this charity event is not so much about you getting additional prospects. You also have a passion for doing this. So you want to make sure that you do one, say, charity event every quarter, every year, or whatever your $100,000 refers to, right? So you could mandate marketing. So, I'm sorry, the marketing mix. So to do that, you just put in a new constraint. And so I would say, let's say I want to do one sponsor event, sorry. So I could just do 0, 1, 0, right? And then this has to be greater than or equal to 1, right? And then pull that down, and presto, there is my new constraint, right, where I am mandating a particular marketing mix. And then finally, the other forms of advertising, but I've already talked about that. You would just simply insert new columns in here and go from there. All right? So there you go. There is your basic marketing problem for linear programming. And I know I've already said this before, but keep in mind that from a few simple changes, this one problem can do a lot of things for you. All right? So there you go, marketing.